Okay, so the whole prison and law conversation often is framed around drugs. So we talked about this briefly right before we started, but we both have some frustrations with our current Attorney General. So basically, a few years ago, Obama's Assistant Attorney General passed this memo or instigated this memo that said that the feds weren't going to go after states for legalizing marijuana. Is that broadly correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now it appears that Sessions is getting rid of that memo. So it's a little unclear. Does that mean they're going to start doing it, or did he just not like the memo, or what? I, as a small government guy, want the states to be able to do whatever they want. Do you have any insight into what's actually going on here?
Yeah, and I'm not certain that I disagree with the Attorney General on the memo. Federal law says this is illegal. It's really strange for DOJ to then come in with a memo that says we're not going to enforce federal law. But what the memo does is just leaves it to the discretion of local U.S. attorneys, and I would be surprised if any of them decided that they wanted to go after people for marijuana in states where it's legalized. But what really needs to happen, like the real solution to this, is not a memo from DOJ, it's the Congress saying, we're not going to be in this business anymore. Let's let states decide this. You would think in a Republican Congress that claims to be for states' rights that they would do that. I mean, the West Coast has spoken. Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Colorado. I mean, there is a movement here of states that have said, we as a policy matter think locking up people for marijuana is not helping the problem.
So what does this tell you about the way the federal government works? Because you're right, a Republican administration, a Republican Congress, everything else, by logic, if logic has anything to do with politics, which I know it often doesn't, they should not be going after states. I mean, it's completely the reverse of what they say they are for. Now, we don't know he's going to do it. That's what you're saying. There may have just been something in the memo that he didn't like. But this is one of the reasons that people just hate politics, I think.
Yeah, it's because it's so hard to get movement on these issues. And part of it is the politics of crime. No one runs on, I'm going to be smart about criminal justice issues. It's always, we got to be tough, we got to be tough, we got to be tough. But you know, you look and we have spent trillions of dollars on the war on drugs. We've locked up hundreds of thousands of our citizens. And drug usage rates are pretty steady over an entire 30-year period. And it turns out you just can't get around addiction issues by locking people up. And the opioid crisis is a good example of that. Posing mandatory minimum sentences on people who are in the throes of addiction is not going to work, because you could tell someone who's addicted to heroin, if you keep doing it, I'm going to put you in prison for 20 years, and I'm not certain it would matter. What they need is treatment, not prison.
So what happens to that conversation? Because you don't hear, I mean, I guess you hear it a little bit maybe, but where are the politicians or the public figures saying, guys, instead of funding all of this money to the prisons, you know, keeping these people here forever, many of them going back right the day after they get out, all of this stuff, where are the people saying we have to help them break addiction?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems I see is we focused on back-end solutions. And so the Federal Bureau of Prisons is a third of DOJ's budget. If we stopped locking up so many people and spent some of that money on treatment, or spent the money on more federal law enforcement who actually solve more crimes, that might actually deter people. But just punishing people through long sentences is never going to have that deterrent effect that the government wants. And you know, you also can't say that we are the land of liberty on the one hand, and then on the other recognize that we incarcerate our citizens at a greater rate than almost any other country on the planet. 2.2 million people in prisons or jail in America today. That's Houston.
Yeah, I was going to say that's more than some small countries, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
that is
crazy,
Houston locked up all around the country. And for a country that claims to be the land of the free, those two things are just incompatible and inconsistent with each other.
Yeah, so I understand the federal level and why there's so much sort of gridlock with that. Are there any states that are doing this really much better than other states?
Yeah, Texas recently closed a bunch of prisons and decided that they were going to try and rehabilitate more people. And as they closed prisons and released more prisoners, you know what happened to their crime rate? It went down.
Wow.
Turns out there's not a great correlation between crime rate and incarceration rate. People commit crimes for all sorts of reasons. The economy, how the economy is doing is probably the biggest factor. But just locking people up is not going to solve the problem of crime. And we have fairly historic low rates of crime at the moment. But you would never know that by our corrections practices and by the number of people we prosecute and put into prisons and jails every day.
Yeah. What are some of your other pet peeve issues? I know the mandatory minimum one I know is the big one.
Prison reform is another one. It's just my belief that if we are going to let someone out of prison someday, why would we not want to spend a little bit of money for rehabilitation and job training? You spend a little bit of money so that you save a whole lot of money by not them getting out of prison and not committing new crimes, not being re-prosecuted, not being re-incarcerated. Spend a little money to save a lot of money. To me, that's good government.
Is there virtually no job training in federal prison? So you were sort of self-training, and I'm sure there are other people that learn shop or learn some other trades, but is there really nothing?
Well, I mean, they have not allocated a great deal of money towards that, and then the wardens of federal prisons have a lot of discretion. I'll give you one example. The prison I was at, we had a really great welding program. Men were learning this trade, they were getting out, they were getting jobs paying $25 an hour, which that's the gold standard.
That's great.
For people getting out. People don't care if you have a felony, if you can weld and do the job.
$25 an hour if you get out of college is actually pretty decent.
And what a warden came in and thought, well, I can get more money if I change the program. So he changed the welding program and put in an associate's degree program in business management. Because we know that every person wants to hire a former person from prison to help manage and run their business. These are the decisions I saw all the time in the system, and most of them just don't make any sense. What we need to do is open those prisons up, get more volunteers, get businesses into the prisons, provide job training, and basic life skills. So many of the men I served time with had never had a bank account. And it's the little things. When I got out of prison, I got to the halfway house, I was told, you need to get a job before we'll give you a pass to leave. And you can't get a job until you get a bank account. And I went to the bank and they said, you haven't banked for 11 years, what's the deal? I had to tell them why. And then I find out that the credit agencies had listed me as deceased.
Jesus.
And so I go back to the halfway house and I'm like, I can't even get the process started of getting a job because I can't get a bank account. And they said, well, you need to hire a lawyer to get this fixed. I said, I just did 11 years in prison. I need a lawyer that I can't afford to get the bank account, to get the job, to get the money. That doesn't compute. And for a lot of people, when they hit those roadblocks, they don't know how to cope with them. And what they do is they revert back to the things they do know.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Shawshank before, but it's like, it reminds me of both. There was Red and the old guy with the bird. I'm blanking, who is that? Blanking on his name. But, Red sees a gun in the window and he's thinking, maybe I should get back in there. And the old guy, it's like he ends up killing himself because they can't function. They just can't function.
Institutional. When you are taken from a system where everything is controlled and you're in a system that says, you are a piece of garbage. Everyone in there, that is the message you get every day in prison. That you are a piece of garbage, you're here to suffer punishment, and you're not going to get out and lead a successful life. That has an impact on people. I got out and wasn't aware of what I could do. I had a woman who was intelligent and beautiful and who loved me who said, you can go to law school. And I had a former Solicitor General of the United States tell me I could go to law school. That had a profound impact on me and my own self-worth and whether I thought I could do some of these things. Had I not had that, I don't think I would have even tried to go to law school.
Yeah, so on that note, let's talk about some of the good stuff. So you're teaching law now. What are kids excited by right now? Like, what do you see them caring about?
Criminal justice reform is a big topic. It's big everywhere I go. I see more people writing about it, people talking about it. Pew just put out a study yesterday saying an overwhelming number of Americans support criminal justice reform. And I think people get it. Like, we are sending people to prison, too many people to prison for too long. We use incarceration as a first response rather than a last resort. and it doesn't work. The irony is the longer you send someone to prison, the less likely they are to come out and be law-abiding, successful citizens. And so why are we doing it?
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about teaching in general. I mean, it must be pretty freaking rewarding for you to be doing this right now.
It is, and it's fun when I'm teaching Fourth Amendment to students or Fifth Amendment Miranda issues.
Yeah.
And now I'm teaching a prison law and policy class where we are diving into both legal doctrine about what are the constitutional rights that prisoners retain, why they're incarcerated, and getting into the policy aspects of why do we impose solitary confinement on people. We know that it makes people who have mental illness, it exacerbates their mental illness, and we know that people without mental illness, it causes it.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you want to impose long terms of solitary confinement on people that are eventually going to be released from prison? Why are we putting sex offenders in prison and not trying to rehabilitate them before we kick them to the outside world and before they're neighbors for me and my young kids?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone that has an outdate, we should be trying to reform and rehabilitate. And I think with a little bit of resources and opening prisons up to more volunteers, we can make a big impact on the recidivism rate.
So you would basically want, so it sounds like you basically want sort of less laws in general, perhaps even less funding, or at least you'd want to shift the funding to some other things. And then you think volunteers and things like that could actually help? Like
Yeah,
just these
I
programs
do. I think people would come in and teach courses. I've seen it in prisons. I went to a private prison in Texas in December, and this prison had allowed a company to come in and build an assembly line. And this woman I spoke to at this women's prison said, I'm making $9 an hour in prison. Now, she said the state takes $3 of that an hour, but I make enough money where I can send $600 or $700 to my daughter who is at Baylor University for her rent. She said, I can't tell you how great it feels to contribute to my daughter's life and be able to do it from here. And she said, I'm going to be able to take these skills that I'm learning and go get a job with this company or a similar company when I get out of prison. Why would we not want to do more of that?
Yeah. I think it's kind of amazing that twice now you've used Texas as an example of a state that's doing this right. I think if you would have asked me before we sat down what state probably has the most backwards legal laws and prison laws, I probably would have said Texas, which is probably just a terrible stereotype. But that's really interesting.
Well, Texas has its issues too. I mean, there's no state that's doing it well.
Mm-hmm.
But there are states that are ramping down punishments and realizing that if we do put people in prison, we need to incentivize them. People that are in prison respond to incentives just like anyone else. California recently passed a bill that incentivizes prisoners by cutting their sentence short if they take rehabilitation programming. And that's something that we at my company, Prison Professors, are talking with correctional associations all over the country about. This is what you should be doing. You incentivize excellence. When I was in prison, all of the things I did, the legal briefs, I won 2 Supreme Court cases all over the country. It was clear to people in the prison that I was on a different trajectory than a lot of people, and that I was not going to be a safety risk when I got out. And yet, no matter what I did, it didn't shorten my sentence by 1 day. And I'd tell you that, the first 5 years in prison, I deserved to be there. But I grew up and I found the law and got responsibility, and the last 5 years, I wasn't a danger to anyone else. I had grown up and I was just warehoused.
Yeah, so I know you focus obviously mostly on criminal law. It's the most personal thing to you and it's what you're teaching and everything else. What are the other parts of the law that we're not paying enough attention to? For example, you just mentioned the Fourth Amendment, right to privacy. I feel like people don't even understand that we have a right to privacy.
Yeah. I mean, the Fourth Amendment is a really tough area of law because there aren't any hard and fast rules. And because of the exclusionary rule, courts are very reticent to say there's a Fourth Amendment violation because the consequence is all of the evidence is thrown out and the person may go, the case gets dismissed.
Right, there's an interesting catch-22 there,
Yeah, and so, what you see is courts, the Supreme Court's slowly starting to get more concerned about technology and privacy. There's a big case pending up there about whether your cell phone metadata requires a warrant for the government to go get a warrant before they can look at that data. And with GPS technology these days, They can get your data from your cell phone and tell exactly what you've been doing, where you've gone. If you visited a doctor, they'll know you may have an illness if they see you've done it several times.
So in effect, has the ship sailed on that then? I mean, how do we have a right to privacy?
We don't in the digital age.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. This is one of the reasons why it's so hard for people coming out of prison, because there are so many collateral consequences. You can be discriminated against in housing and employment. You can lose your voting rights. And you can't really hide it anymore. So we have all these initiatives to ban the box, ban the question on the application.
Mm-hmm.
But if employers can just run a Google search and find out that you committed a felony, I'm not certain that just pushing that information to the interview is going to lead to more people getting jobs.
Right.
And so I would like to see more groups just go to employers, go to big companies and say, affirmatively hire people coming out of prison. Try it. Maybe give them a tax break or some sort of incentive to get them to employ these people, because there are a whole lot of people coming out who want, the primary reason why they go back to committing crimes is they can't find employment and a place to live.
Yeah. You mentioned to me briefly in the green room that you're trying to work on some stuff with the White House right now.
Yeah, so I sat at the table a couple weeks ago as the president said that we need prison reform, and they're trying to push a bill in the House. It's going to start in the House that would provide incentives to prisoners to take rehabilitation programs so that we can reduce the recidivism rate. And I'm a big believer that we can if we structure things in the appropriate manner.
Yeah. So on this case, this sounds like something good that Trump's trying to push through, which usually isn't prison reform usually thought of as a lefty or a progressive idea?
It is, but there are more and more conservative groups who understand that the criminal justice system has gotten too big and encompasses too much law. Too many things are criminalized, and we are over-relying on incarceration. And it's funny, I go around to every single group in D.C., the Heritage Foundation, Cato, the Koch Institute, ACLU, NAACP. These people can agree on nothing, but they all agree that the criminal justice system is a mess and that it needs to be fixed.
Yeah. What do you see as their giant differences, though, in the solution? So I would imagine some of the ones on the right you just mentioned, they just want the government to do less or get rid of some regulation or get rid of some laws. Ones on the left want the government probably to do more.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone realizes we need to reevaluate sentences and the lengths of sentences. Mm-hmm. I think there's disagreement with how various crimes are prosecuted, like environmental crimes. Congress likes to pass statutes without what they call mens rea requirements, that you knowingly violated the law, and people on the left would say it's really hard to get CEOs and companies that do this to be prosecuted if you have the mens rea, whereas on the right, they're a big believer that mens rea is a necessary part. If we're going to send you to prison, it's because you knowingly violated the law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
or knowingly committed an act that violated the law.
Right, but as you were saying before, there are so many laws at this point that really nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
You have 5,000 statutes, over 5,000, no one has an accurate count, that carry criminal penalties. Now administrative agencies can sometimes create regulations with criminal penalties. Then you have, in California, you probably have another 2,000 or 3,000 statutes. So there are 8, 9, 10,000 things that you can do wrong that may lead to you going to jail or prison. I would say that state legislatures and the Congress does not value individual liberty if that's the case. We went for the majority of this country's founding, we went and used civil penalties, fines, money damages to solve a lot of these problems. And somewhere along the way in the 70s and 80s, we thought we needed to fix everything with prison sentences.
Yeah, I mean, it's so backwards. You know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of my audience watching this is going, I like intuitively you just know this, that there's something so just wrong with this system, and yet it just keeps trucking along. So maybe, look, if Trump's passing something that you're involved in and it gets to the House, maybe something will move now.
Yeah, I'm greatly encouraged by the White House's passion for this issue. Jared Kushner is incredibly passionate about it. His dad went to federal prison in 2002. He's been directly impacted. Mm-hmm. Most people I know don't understand the criminal justice system till a family member gets caught up, and then they realize, oh my gosh, this is a mess.
Yeah.
and a huge problem. And you know, I think conservatives in the House and in the Senate will get on board with prison reform. And my hope is that it will be a piece of bipartisan legislation, because this is one of the few bipartisan issues that we have in the country.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you ever coach any inmates now? Do you ever go to a prison and find somebody and be like, you know, let me tell you my story?
I have a lot of people I stay in contact with prisons. I go into prisons and give talks all the time. My recent thing has been mentoring people that have committed serious felonies who are now on their way to currently in or recently graduated from law school. And a lot of them are now getting law licenses this summer.
Wow.
And it's been interesting to see, because I probably had several hundred lawyers tell me, you can never go to law school. Even if you do graduate from law school, no state bar association is ever going to let you become an attorney. And they were just wrong.
Yeah.
And so I got to argue a case for one of my friends in the Washington State Supreme Court this past fall. It was the first time the court had taken what they call a character and fitness case, whether you have the character and fitness necessary to practice law. First time they had taken a case in 37 years.
Huh.
Argued the case. On the way home on the plane, I get a text saying that the court ruled unanimously 2 hours after the oral argument in favor of my client.
Wow.
And she's now going to take the bar exam in February, and she'll probably be a lawyer by May.
So the counter argument was simply that she had been in jail, basically, so she wouldn't have the
jail,
character
and
or
she
fitness?
had drug addiction issues, although she'd been clean for 6 years. And she had extraordinary success in law school, graduated with honors, had won all of these awards, had been appointed to commissions by the governor of Washington and supported by a huge amount of licensed attorneys, and the bar still denied her 6-3.
Yeah. So then we have to waste all this time and money and energy and resources to allow her to go ahead and
Yeah,
go for
and-
that. What do we do to get rid of all of that? So, because a lot of what you're talking about is just generally, I think, what people are frustrated by with government. Just like this mid-level bloat, nobody really knows what's going on. There are either a zillion laws or a zillion regulations that half of them conflict with each other. Just all of that. What do you really do to remove that?
I don't know. Like, the occupational licensing schemes are really impactful for people coming out of prison, because many of them say, if you have a felony, we're just not letting you do these professions.
Right.
And you know,
So like if you want to clean a pool or something, you need a pool license.
I don't think that we need people coming out who have committed sex offenses teaching in junior high schools. I get that sometimes there are offenses that apply to a particular job, but most of these things aren't looking at the crime the person committed. It's just across the board policy of you're not going to be allowed in the profession. And when you lock people coming out of prison from all of these professions, you make it very difficult for them to ever get back to having a real life.
Yeah. Well, your story is obviously inspiring, so I've really enjoyed this. Did we miss anything major on the legal front that we should absolutely knock out? I feel like we hit your
No.
majors. Feel good?
Yeah.
We did our whole Star Wars talk already
We
in
did.
the green room, so I think we're good. Well, it was a pleasure chatting with you, and for more on Shon, you can follow him on Twitter. It's Shon Hopwood. That's SHON HOPWOOD.